All right, we are getting reports now. France is saying that one of their agents has been killed in Gaza. The French and Israeli foreign ministers are meeting in Tel Aviv. Let's go to our correspondent, Alan Fisher. He's live for us in occupied East Jerusalem. Alan, what more are you hearing about this?
This is someone who'd been employed by the French since 2002. During the bombing in Rafah, he'd taken cover with friends and colleagues in a residential building in Rafah. On Wednesday night, that was hit by the Israelis. The French consulate worker was badly injured and later succumbed to his injuries. Now, he'd managed to get some of his family out to France, but he had decided to stay. And the French are condemning this attack on a residential building and are clearly demanding answers from the Israelis. So just to recap, this is someone who worked for the French diplomatic service, was attached to their foreign ministry, had been working in Gaza, had been working with the French since 2002 and has been killed in a bombing raid by the Israelis on a residential building in Rafah on Wednesday evening.
All right, Alan, so pressure from Israel externally and a great deal of pressure internally too. The army has announced more deaths of Israeli soldiers at a time when the public couldn't be angrier with the government's handling of the war.
And certainly this has been perhaps the most difficult 48 hours for the Netanyahu government since October the 7th, the death of 3 people who are being held captive. You can see in the newspapers it still dominates the coverage. This is Marev. The headline is Tragedy of the Captured, and underneath it lists the picture of the 3 who died. This is Idiot, another newspaper. The headline is How They Were Killed, and there the deaths should have been prevented. And then in Haaretz, which is a famous newspaper here in Israel, soldiers killed while the captives were waving white flags. And the front page is a picture of the Bedouin captive who was one of the 3 who was killed. There is a great deal of anger directed towards Benjamin Netanyahu because of the death of the 3. Now, the Israeli government is saying it was a confused situation. The soldiers had not been given any indication of how to react to this sort of thing. But there's anger at Benjamin Netanyahu because he didn't make the announcement himself. He left it to others in the government. He hasn't faced questions about this. And there are a number of opinion pieces in Israeli newspapers on Sunday condemning Benjamin Netanyahu for what he did, including from people who, since the start of the war, have been largely supportive of the Prime Minister showing a united front. One of them is the former Chief of Staff of the Israeli Army, Dan Holtz, who wrote, "Only an image of victory is you leaving with a white flag." So you can see there is a great deal of condemnation for Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, he has set forward the idea of renewing talks with Hamas to try and get some of the captives released. And the head of Mossad, the external intelligence service, has been in Europe speaking to the Qatari Prime Minister, who obviously has a conduit to Hamas. But he apparently told the Israelis that they have to be more accommodating. Essentially, they have to be considering a larger ceasefire, a longer ceasefire, if there's to be any exchange of prisoners, and that's certainly Hamas's negotiating point. But the Israelis have made it clear that this war will continue and continue for a couple of months yet.
Yes, Alan, there seem to be continuing mixed messages from the Israeli government because on the one hand, they have done a great about-turn, done a remarkable about-turn by saying that they're going to restart negotiations for a ceasefire, but at the same time that the war against Hamas must continue.
And again, on Saturday evening in Tel Aviv, we saw hundreds of those in support of those that are being held captive and their families, and they were calling on Benjamin Netanyahu, the war cabinet, the wider Israeli government, to do a lot more to get the people who are being held captive out of there. In fact, one said, "We only receive dead bodies, stop the war and bring them home." There are many in the group who support the captives and their families, who believe that a ceasefire is perhaps the only way that they will manage to get the captives returned, although Benjamin Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant, the Israeli Defence Minister, they have made it clear they believe their negotiating position will be improved significantly by military pressure, and they're not going to bend to diplomatic pressure, which will increase after the death of this diplomatic worker from France in Gaza in the last few days.